No, that's perfect. Thank you.
So I think this was the slide that we stopped at last week, which was about pediatric calculations. And we were talking about how you do milligram per kilogram per dose. So this one says if it's for 10 milligrams per kilogram per dose, and then QID is 4 times a day, then your first thing you have to do is figure out how many kilograms they weigh. So they did the 100 times the 0.45, and that's how they got the 45 kilograms. And then we talked about how you guys could do 100 divided by 2.2, and it'd be just about the same too. So that's how they got the 45. So then they have 45 kilograms, and they're like, okay, it's 10 milligrams per kilogram, so you just do 45 times 10, and that's 450. But that's how much they would take.
Pediatrics 133.
For page, let's see.
Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I was looking for mine, but yours is you have the second edition, so you'd be a better source for that than me anyway. Oh, here we go. Yeah, if you have the other book, it's like 140. 140 is when it starts. So they figured out 450, but if they're taking it 4 times a day, then they have to divide that by 4. So actually, no, I'm sorry. Actually, so 450 is the dose, but if you wanted to know how much for the 24 hours, you multiply it by 4. If it said per day, that would be, if you would divide it by 4. So each dose, so they're getting 4 doses of the 450 each day, which equals 1,800. I read that wrong, so I'm sorry. So that's one thing you just have to kind of look at when you're looking at the questions too, to make sure you don't do what I just did, because what you figured was the 4 times a day, but if it said daily, and then they asked if you broke it down into 4, you'd have to divide it instead of multiply it. So, okay. So 5 milligrams per kilograms per dose twice a day. If they weigh 50 pounds, then we're going to times it by the 0.45. So I got 22.5 kilograms. And then, so I'm 5 milligrams per kilogram. So I did the 22.5 times the 5, and I got 112.5 milligrams. But if they're doing 2 doses, how much per day would they get? I times it, I multiplied it by 2, and I got C, 225. Did everyone else get that? No?
How did you do that again?
I did.
Okay.
I took the 50 pounds, and they've been doing like times 0.45 to figure out kilograms. You could do divided by 2.22. I'm just doing it how they had it. So you do 50 times 0.45, and then I got 22.5 kilograms. Well, I took that, the 22.5, and I multiplied it by the 5 that's up there. So then that's when I got the 112.5.
Okay.
But they want, that would be per dose, because it's twice a day. So this is one where you have to figure out how much per day. So all I did was take the 112 and I multiplied it by 2, or I added it together. since BID is twice a day. Yeah. 225. I know, I think it's easier to see it when you're like actually doing it. Because it seems harder than what it is. But I think once you start practicing with it, it's not as bad. I'll try not to stand in front of it. So that is really tricky because they put both answers up there. They put the 112.5 trying to mess with us to see if we were paying attention. But that last one put me on my toes, so I didn't do that again. So elderly patients, their problem is that they have a slower metabolism, so they're kind of the opposite. The pediatrics have really fast metabolism, so they kind of metabolize all their medications really quick, whereas the older we get, the slower we metabolize it, so they're more at risk for getting toxicity because they're not breaking it down and metabolizing it as fast. So a lot of times they have to reduce the dosages, but there's not really a magic formula because everybody's different, of course. So they just kind of look at like organ function. So a lot of times they'll look at their labs, like their kidney labs would be like your BUN and creatinine. But different labs that they look at, and they're like, okay, well, they're okay to have this dose or that dose. Usually it's the pharmacist does a lot of that. The pharmacist and the doctor, they look at all the labs before they order any medications for people. But that's just something that is good to know, because if you saw somebody that's older and maybe they didn't have good kidney function and they had a really high dose of something, you could always question it. Are you sure you want to give them this much? Did you look at their labs? But they usually do a really good job about it. Just important to know. So this was kind of confusing when I read this in the book. I don't know if anyone else read this, and I even tried to Google a better way of, doing it, but I don't think there is a better way. So what I found is a picture. So a lot of things are ordered with the ratio to height or total body surface area. Usually children, that's how we do the medications for children. Especially like, I know at the hospital, it's all about, their weight and their height. If you didn't know, they have these like little tape measures that you can just put right out there on their bed. And then everything that's in that, like if they're yellow colored for how long they are, that's all their medications are in that yellow drawer. So they do that a lot with kids, and then also like chemotherapy medications, things are really super strong. So the BSA can be calculated by the pharmacist or the prescriber, and usually what they do, they calculate the weight in kilograms and they look at the height in centimeters. And then they multiply the height by the weight and divide it by 3,600. But we have this like wonderful chart here. So if we actually know how to use the chart, then it's amazing. And I found a picture online that kind of gives you a visual of how to use it. So with this, you just look at their height in centimeters and their weight in kilograms. And you get like a ruler and you draw a line, and this is what you're looking for, the BSA. So they would be 1.2. That would be the dose. So to me, because I like to make everything easier, I think that's way easier. You just draw that line and it lines right up with the dose that you want. But when I was reading the book, I felt like it didn't give you a good explanation. It said, how do you do this? Here's some sample questions, but it didn't say how to figure it out, really. It just gives you this chart. So if you guys have any questions about that, That's the way I would suggest to do it. You
But
just,
are they gonna have that at the doctor's office? I mean, are they gonna have that chart that you can, I mean,
they should.
Yeah.
They should.
okay.
So then once you figured out what the BSA is, then you can go to the, yeah.
Picture of that real quick. Alright, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, can I do?
And I can upload that too.
The one in the book doesn't work because it's a surface area, but it doesn't have that other thing. Like, I was trying to do this in the book one, but it won't.
Yeah, that where it says surface area M2, that's the answer that you would put. So they have the height on the left and then the weight on the right, and then that line that's in the middle,
So.
that's what you're lining up.
Okay, it's not the same as up there because,
They added that extra little
okay,
box.
so it's a little different than.
So you could just kind of maybe ignore that box.
Okay, that's what
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This chart isn't made up. Comes up with
50 and 6 kilograms. So you do 50 to 6. And then you might have to use like a pencil or something to mark your spot when you look. But then you would go, okay, 0.1, 0.2. These are 2. And each little line is 2, or 0.2. 0.02, I guess it would be, because that's 0.3. So then once you figure out what that is, then you can do the dosage. So you have milligram per kilogram per dose, which is what we've already kind of been doing. So if they ordered 50 milligrams and then the M2 dose, and then the patient's BSA was 0.6, then you do 50 times the 0.6. So that'd be 30 milligrams per dose. So that's once you've already looked at this chart and figured out what the BSA is, then you're doing 50 times the BSA.
Will you have to do that a lot in like on a daily basis?
I think that normally they just do milligram per kilogram. I see that more often than not. But
Right.
they've decided that you should know that just in case. And if you worked maybe, it says they use this a lot in chemotherapy. So if you worked in like a cancer clinic, then maybe that's somewhere that they use that a lot more. But no, I have never had to personally do that. We always do milligrams per kilogram. But, they have to find like 5 different ways to do everything, so.
Okay, thank you.
So when we're reconstituting powders, that's like if a lot of times we'll have an antibiotic or something and it's in a little vial and powder, and then we have to figure out how are we going to get it in the syringe. So we have to inject like a sterile liquid in there. Sometimes it's sterile water, sometimes it's like normal saline, and then you kind of mix it up and draw it out. So that's what you're doing when you're reconstituting powders. So basically you're turning the powder into a liquid. I think the powder form lasts a lot longer than the liquid form, so that's why we have that. They have a longer shelf life. But when you do it, you have to know what the dose is after you do it. So usually on the bottle it'll tell you. So for their example, it says if 2.1 milliliters of sterile water is put into that vial, then your solution will be 250 milligrams per milliliter. So that's another calculation that you might end up having to do. I'll turn it to this and kind of show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so the drug label indicated that you should add 62 milliliters of your sterile water, we'll say, or diluent to the powder. So then it's going to be 200 milligrams per 5 milliliters. And you're supposed to do 300 per dose. So for me, their example, well, it's pretty much the same, yeah. I would take the 300 is the dose ordered right there. So that's why you have the 300 on top, because you always put what's ordered on top. And then the 200 is what you have. So you do the 300 divided by the 200, and then the quantity is the 5. So it's basically the same thing we were doing already. It's just adding one more little step as far as knowing what your diluent ends up being, what the dose of that is, or the concentration. But they always say on there, they should always tell you on the vial, it should always say, you know, inject 1 milliliter of sterile fluid, and this is what you'll end up with. Or whatever it says. This one says you add 62, which is kind of a lot, I think. But I guess if it was like a IV bag, it wouldn't be that much. So then we have a practice one. See if you guys can give the same answer as me. I don't know if everyone else set theirs up the same, but I took the 400 is what I want, and I divided by what I have, which is the 500, and then I multiplied it by the 1 ml, and that's how I got 0.8. Because right here it says 500 per milliliter. So even though I added the 2.3, I'm not worried about the 2.3 anymore. You really don't even have to think about that once it's in there. All you want to think about is the concentration. So sometimes I think those extra numbers kind of mess people up. So just once you put it in there, just forget about it, and then you focus on the 500 per ml. Did everybody get the same answer? Okay. So we're going back to the dimensional analysis, my favorite. So now we're talking about IV pumps, the drip rates. Usually they'll write like, I want you to give 1 liter of IV fluids over 8 hours or something like that. So 1 liter would be 1,000 milliliters. I guess I'll use their example. That might make better sense for you since it's right there in front of you. So theirs is 200 milliliters over 5 hours. 2,000. Thank you. I even had caffeine today. It's the no sugar thing, I think.
Okay.
My brain can't function. So the total milliliters that were ordered were the 2,000. and I'm gonna do it over 8 hours, or over 5 hours. Oh my gosh. Don't listen to me, just read what it says. But we're doing it over 5 hours. So basically I'm just dividing the 2,000 by 5. And that's how they got the 400. So that one's easy, I think, kind of.
Right.
You just take the total amount, divide it by the hours, and you get how much per hour. And that's another one. Sometimes they do. I have had them say that, but a lot of times they'll just say, give them 100 an hour. Because 400 an hour, that's kind of a lot for a little IV. Kind of like a bolus just about, so. But if they do ask you to figure it out, that would be how you do it. You just take the total amount, divide it by the time, and that's how you get your milliliters per hour. So, of course, we have a practice one. So, I'm just going to do 750 divided by 2. Yep. 375. Good job. But of course, you know, we have to make it even more difficult.
Oh, yeah.
This is like if you don't have an IV pump or something. So basically it's telling you volume times drips divided by time, or volume times drop factor divided by time equals the rate. So the next one has an actual example that we can use. So 250 milliliters over 2 hours, and the tubing is 15 drips per milliliter. So they did the volume over 120 minutes, which is 2 hours, and then the drip factor over the mLs. Well, the mLs cancel each other out. So then you're getting the
mL cancel each other out.
Why? Because there's one on the top and the bottom. So you can just take the milliliters away, and then that's how you get the drips per minute. So what I did was the 250 times 15, and then I divided it by the 120. And I got 31.25, but that rounds down to 31 drips per minute. So I just took the whole top and I multiplied it, and then I divide it by the 120. So you're going to keep the drops per minute. You're just going to cross out the milliliters, since there's one on the top and the bottom. Okay, so for this one, I'm doing 400 milliliters over 180 minutes because it's 3 hours. And then I've got the 10 drops per milliliter, so I have 10 GTT, and then milliliter. So I'm just crossing those out. And then I ended up getting 22.
Okay, now I understand when you say drop the ml. It's like,
Yeah,
why?
you just, well, I thought maybe if we actually did a real one.
It's like, why do you just? Okay, so the ml, so you're left with 400.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
So you just do 400 times 10 divided by 180.
Okay, that's canceling out the mLs. Okay, I'm understanding now. All right.
So 400 times the 10 equals 4,000 divided by the 180. It's actually 22.22, but I just took off the 22 because I rounded it down.
Yeah. I wrote it down wrong.
Oh, well, I can't say it out loud, so you know. So we always double check it, I guess. Nothing's worse than when you do like the math for something and then the answer you got is not A, B, C, or D. Then you know, oh, I have to redo that again. So that's why you always kind of double check everything, especially with medications, just because we're all human. So we make mistakes. So intake and output are really, oh, do you need me to go back?
No, you're fine. 22. Okay, you round down. Okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, it's like 22.22.
Yeah, okay.
2 forever. So it says the most important conversion is knowing that there's 30 milliliters in an ounce, because usually we do most things in milliliters. So when you do the conversions, that's one that you want to try to memorize. And then we try to educate patients on knowing proper conversions. Just because if they're going to be doing, say, if they're drinking 12 ounces of soda a day, you'd have to take the 12 times 30. They're drinking 360 milliliters. So that sounds a lot worse, really, when you think about it that way. You're like, oh, I just drank 12 ounces of soda, no big deal. So then you take the 4 times the 360, so you're actually in a whole day you're taking 1440, so 1,440 milliliters. So there's some people, especially like kidney dialysis patients that don't have the kidney function, they're on, or congestive heart failure people, they have a fluid restriction every day, and they can only have 1,000 milliliters per day. So if they're drinking 1,440 just of soda,
Right.
they can't have anything else. They've already exceeded their limit. And that 1,000 is really hard to kind of stick by.
I think you're the devil shot the game.
Yes. A lot of times I give them ice chips if they're really thirsty, because ice actually melts down to half. So like 1 cup of ice is only really a half of a cup. And so kind of they can chomp on that. But yeah, it is hard. And I know I've talked to different dialysis patients, and if they drink too much fluids, then it really like cramps and hurts really bad when they go to dialysis and they take all that fluid off. So it's kind of in their best interest not to drink a lot. And if they do drink 1,000, I probably wouldn't waste all that on soda because there's so much sodium in that. I would probably do like water. Water's the best, right? Juice is okay too, but it has lots of sugar, they say. They say it's better to just eat the fruit. But yeah, so that is something that is probably going to be kind of, you'll have to educate people on how to figure that out each day. And a lot of times at the hospital anyway, we'll have a set amount per shift, because if you're sleeping all night, you don't need as much. So maybe you only need like 100 or 200 milliliters at night. But then for the rest of the day, that's when you're going to get like the 800. So you could split it like 400 on first shift and 400 on second shift, 200 at night. Which at home, they're not going to think of it in shifts, but you could say between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. you can have 800. They might, but they're not thinking about it in milliliters, they're thinking about in ounces, so you have to kind of educate them on that. So just remember 1 ounce equals 30 milliliters. So if they're reporting to you how much they have per day, then you can kind of multiply that out and explain to them how much more they're drinking than they're supposed to be. Okay. So we're doing the sodas again. I have 12-ounce soda, 10-ounce decaffeinated. Oh, we're adding them all together. So I did the 12 times 30 mLs equals 360. That's for the soda. Then they actually drink 2 of those. So I did the 360 and 360 for the other soda. And then the coffee, they're drinking 10 ounces. So I'm doing the 10 times 30 equals 300. And that's coffee. Then they're also having a 4-ounce glass of water. So 4 times 30, 120. Yep. And then the last one is, their total for the day. So I like to add it up and like put them on top of each other so I can just kind of go down and add it. Or that way it's like a visual thing. I do all my calculations over here and then I do all the addition in one row so I don't forget to add something. So I got 1140 by just adding them together.
1,000. That's not a lot to drink during the day.
No, and not everybody's 1,000. I mean, it depends.
I'm just saying.
On the doctor's order, some people maybe like 1,500 or 2,000 a day. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when you think about it like that, especially
like
because
that, you're over.
Yeah. And then like our whole life, they're like, drink water, don't get dehydrated.
Yeah, just figure it's 1,900. That's like, okay.
Yeah. So it's challenging for people for sure. Especially because like we consider anything that's liquid at room temperature a liquid. So I would consider like Jell-O, you would do the popsicles, all of that would be considered a liquid. So it is hard for people to stick to those, and they try not to, I don't think, give people those unless they're really going overboard, I think, and then they're like, no, hey, we've got to cut this down, because if they have congestive heart failure and they're drinking all this liquid, then it, they're like fluid overload. They can't breathe. They can't, they're like out of breath just moving. So I believe we've made it to the end of chapter 8. Yay! And now this is a fun moment because we're kind of out of the calculation section. Yay! Now we're into the real deal, like starting to learn about how to give the medications. Well, where is... I thought I pulled all my PowerPoints up, but I guess I did not. Okay. And I did kind of tweak these yesterday, so if you printed them out, they're exactly the same order they should be, but they're just, I added little things to it, so it might look different but be the same. Hopefully it saved it, because I know it doesn't say chapter 9 on here. Oh well, chapter 9 is giving medication, so there we go. So chapter 9 talks about all of the enteral medications and how to administer them. So usually anything that goes through your gastrointestinal tract is called an enteral medication. So I put a little pretty picture of your gastrointestinal tract. Basically, everything's either going to your stomach or small intestines. Just throwing stuff on the floor. So some examples are capsules, tablets, liquids, enemas, and suppositories. The advantage is that they're like the cheapest types of medications. So that's always an advantage for people. And usually patients prefer that. I don't know, I'd rather have somebody give me a pill than get a shot or an IV for sure. But the disadvantage is if maybe they're not good at, or I mean they have swallowing problems, so they might choke on their medications, especially some of those pills are so big, so that can be kind of a challenge for some people, and sometimes you can crush them up or get liquid forms too, so that helps. And also the stomach acid can destroy or inactivate the medication sometimes, and the amount of food in your stomach can also affect the absorption of medication. And if you take medicine on an empty stomach, sometimes it makes you really nauseous. So that's an added thing that I just thought I'd throw in there. A lot of times when you get the medications, it'll say drink with milk or take with milk or food. So contraindications, reasons why we would not want to give them an oral medication, nausea or vomiting. They're just going to throw it right back up. That always kills me if like they have the nausea medication by mouth. And I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work. You kind of have to try a different way sometimes. Unless you take it before it gets too bad. If they can't swallow or if certain medications are inactivated by the stomach acid, or obviously if they're unconscious, then you can't give it to them by mouth. So they're not going to cooperate very well. Yeah, just let me just
There, hold 'em
put
down.
that in there. It'll work. It'll dissolve eventually. So, disadvantages. Now this is another one that would probably trip me up because it says except. So all of those are a disadvantage except for, yeah, because it's it says most expensive. Well, we just said it's the cheapest. So yeah, you're exactly correct. You have a price. If there's anything good in there. Were you the one that? No,
It was her.
Back here. Well, at least
It was that
I knew the direction it came from.
That one?
I love you too, Rachel. She's got fortune cookie in here.
So solid medications, you have the tablets. That's basically what's in the picture, just a disc of medication. You guys are used to that when you take like a Tylenol or ibuprofen, that's a tablet. Most of them can be crushed, but the enteric coated